Drums are definitely something that I enjoy recording. I love drums. And I get excited about it. I'm not a drummer at all. I think maybe that's the reason why I love drums so much, is because every time I sit down at a kit and try and play, and you see me do this, it's awful. I have no coordination. I can't make them sound good when I'm trying to play them. So it's been kind of a personal thing for me to try and to just make drums sound good in the studio, because that's really all I can bring to the instrument. So when I'm approaching drums, there are so many kinds of drum sounds. You have to have a good understanding of types of drums and tuning drums, and in particular, I am a cymbal nut. I collect cymbals everywhere I go. I keep my eyes open for unique and fun cymbals. Basically because cymbals are hard to get right. I think they're the hardest part of a drum kit to get right. And in my opinion, that's still the best argument for recording analog, is that somehow analog tape just handles cymbals so beautifully. I do most of my recording into Pro Tools these days, so I don't get to use analog as much as I would like. But one thing I found that really helps is having nice, like beautiful, mellow cymbals. That certain cymbals have to have a nice decay, and other ones you want them to just go away quickly. When I'm looking at a drum kit, when I walk in, the first thing I do is I'll listen to a guy play, and I'll want to hear them play the song we're recording. A lot of times a drummer will just want to pull out like their fanciest groove, which is fun, but it really is kind of irrelevant. I want to hear the song and get an idea of the sound that we need to capture. And then what I'll do is I'll start usually with the snare drum to try and find that thing. Like in my world, the way I think about drums is it all kind of revolves around that snare sound. Once you find the snare sound, then that kind of tells you how you should tune the toms, what kind of cymbal choices you should make, and how you should tune the kick and where you should mic it. I really concentrate on getting that snare drum tuning and tone right from the instrument. Now, as far as setting up and miking, you can put drums in a booth, and that's fun. You can put drums in a live room, that's fun. And any variants in between. There are all kinds of techniques using, multiple mics, whatever. That's all cool. But the one thing I would say that I always do every time is I make sure that when I listen to when I set up, I listen to my overheads first. I always pull up my overhead mics and make sure that they're balanced. By that, I mean I check for phase, and I physically measure from snare drum to each mic to make sure that I'm going to be in phase. And then the other thing I do is I want to make sure that it's actually in the center. So when I have those overheads wide panned, that my kick and snare are center, because if you don't do that, things tend to lean and get strange, especially if you use any compression. And then when you're blending in your close mics, they don't make as much sense. So I like things to be really solid and centered. And sometimes I'll just, if it's not sounding centered to me, I'll start rotating the mics around the kit until I find where they actually center the snare and the kick, and then I get a good balance of toms and cymbals. And I want it to sound, in the overheads, I want it to sound like we could get by with this, with the exception of the kick drum. And there's a very practical reason why. If you think about it, every other drum, the head is pointing up. But with kick drum, it's not. It's pointing out, which puts you at the null point phase-wise. So you're not going to get enough kick from your overheads, no matter what anyone says. It's going to be very tricky at best to try and get enough kick drum from your overheads. So I try and make sure that the rest of the drum kit sounds good. The kick should be there, but not, it's not going to be as strong as you'd like. And then I go immediately to room mics, if I'm using any room mics. And that, on room mics, I try and make sure that I have a really good picture of the whole kit. I like using a spaced pair, and I tend to have compressors on them for fun that are always being messed with. So it's different every song, but I do like to mess with room mics. I try all different things. I'll move them in close, pull them far back, pull them together, way wide. Sometimes one in front, one in back. I try all kinds of different setups to get the sound right for those, but whatever it is, I want to make sure that it does sound like a full kit, so that we could just use those. And because I tend to prefer wide-spaced room mics, I had to come up with a technique that I use, and that is I have a mono mic that's usually fairly close in to the kit, and it's usually a ribbon mic. And I tend to kill that with a compressor too. And then when I pull up my room mics and blend them in, there's usually a big hole in the middle because there's wide space. So I'll just blend in a little bit of that close mono ribbon mic to fill in the hole so it doesn't feel, strange or phasey. And that's how I approach it. There's really everything else, tuning or drum choices, all those things will change from song to song. But every time, I always make sure that overheads are centered in phase and sound like a drum kit.